Hello everyone, my name is Rick Walland. I'm a drummer and a musician with 17 years experience working and playing in the UK music industry. I also hold a bachelor's degree in popular music and recording. This is the second episode in my new podcast series entitled Conversations With. In this episode, I'm joined by my friend Dave McMahon, a noise rock maestro from the UK but now living in Japan. Here's a little preview.
Larry from Fairies Wear Boots on bass, doing like these colossal kind of Black Sabbath kind of just like chugging stoner rock bass line. Ezra on clarinet and sampler. Gully on just fucking really far out kind of like, krautrock meets kind of Elvin Jones kind of. So we grew up in a family. I mean, I suppose we grew up in a family. Who would have thought it? In a family, yeah.
Just as Christopher, I couldn't imagine doing like a Christmas song, if you get me.
Well, imagine it. Imagine it. It's about to become a reality, and I want you to be a part of it. But at the time, he was just doing this really fucking volcanic, like post-Hendrix kind of like Acid Mother's Temple, a bit like Kawabata Makoto from Acid Mother's Temple, just really full-on sight shredding. We got kicked off the stage after about 15 minutes or something like that. Mike, who used to run the Lux, was like, no, I'm not having it.
That seems to happen a lot at the old Lux. Like bands getting kicked out and kicked off the stage.
All right, well, as you know, Rick, I'm from Wigan, same as you. Basically lived in Wigan all my life until I went to university, spent 3 years in York, and then went back for about a year and a half, 2 years, and then at the age of 22, just before my 23rd birthday, I moved to Japan. That was in 2003, and you could do the maths, do the sums, and work out that 17 years ago. I wasn't necessarily expecting to be living away from the UK for so long, but obviously with everything that's unfolding right now and has unfolded over the past year or two, it's fairly safe to say I'm not regretting my decision. Well,
yeah. So what was it like growing up in Wigan, and were you kind of, I guess, when did you start playing music, and when did your career begin as a musician, as a songwriter?
My career. Well, as a
songwriter,
an improvising musician. I mean, that's I suppose one of the kind of key things to say, and somebody who I imagine you'll probably interview for one of these in the future, my twin brother.
Hopefully, yeah.
John. Yeah, John is also, although he's not an active musician himself, he has kind of dabbled and we've done stuff together before. I'm sure some of that'll come up later in the discussion, but he's a promoter and a producer of various projects. He's very involved in the music scene back in the UK and in West Yorkshire now. Is it West Yorkshire, East Yorkshire? Never sure. I guess
so. He's up in Todmorden, Hebden Bridge.
It's in Hebden Bridge, yeah. So I guess that's west. But anyway, so we grew up in a family. I mean, I suppose we grew up in a family. Who would have thought it? In a family, yeah. But, a family of very keen singers, and so I mean, I suppose that was one of the earliest kind of musical influences. Generally quite a lot of singing in the house and in the car and what have you. In terms of the music that we're actually exposed to from an early age, there was nothing generally that I'd hesitate to use the word interesting, but our mum had fairly middle of the road kind of taste in music, so it would generally be cassettes of ABBA and Elkie Brooks, and probably towards the end of primary school. I should say I was born in 1980, right? So
Okay.
I'm 40 now. So kind of all of the formative musical, influences and the kind of music that was buzzing around in the background. I mean, I suppose that's largely, 1980s stuff, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But my mum and dad being a little bit older, maybe, a lot of the stuff that was getting played in the house and in the car and what have you could predated that a little bit. So your kind of ABBA and your Elkie Brooks and Julio Iglesias and stuff. Dad was, more of a, he professes to be, a big fan of jazz, but I mean, I suppose he never really listened to a lot of that stuff around the house. I mean, when we were in our teens and we found out that he was into jazz and, we wanted to, have something to share, and then we would buy him, like a Bix Beiderbecke, because I'm a big fan. I love Bix Beiderbecke or Gene Krupa or whatever. So we'd kind of buy him, jazz CDs and cassettes, and that was when that stuff started to get played in the house. But I mean, that was, I suppose, what he was listening to when he was younger. But yeah, a lot of AOR, and like a lot of folk music, and but like as in Irish folk music. But again, nothing like particularly underground or cool like Planksty or whatever. It was more like the Dubliners, and then kind of, I suppose, like Lancashire folk stuff like the Peelers.
Okay.
Is that folk? It's all kind of Uncle Joe's mint balls or whatever, that kind of stuff. But yeah, lots
George
of
Formby,
singing
I
at
guess
home.
he's fairly well known.
I mean, I suppose, yeah, kind of skiffily, yeah.
From Wigan.
Ukulele playing, yeah. So yeah, but then from, I mean, I suppose kind of like musicals and stuff, like your kind of Les Miserables and your Andrew Lloyd Webber and that. These are all, desperately uncool kind of formative influences, but all that was buzzing about. But at the same time, we've got older siblings as well. There's five of us, and particularly my sister Charlotte, who's 10 years older, so she would have been born in 1970, and my brother Matthew is 8 years older, 72. They were into more interesting stuff. Scarlett, she changed the name to Scarlett, was a goth.
Okay.
So again, not that much of that stuff kind of getting played in the house, but an awareness of that. So yeah, my sister Scarlett was a goth, and so there were, there's an awareness of stuff like The Cure and the Art of Noise, and she was also into a lot more kind of like proper underground stuff, or your kind of Coil and Psychic TV and stuff, although of course we weren't aware of that at all at the time. And our older brother Matt was also into bits of kind of, I mean, Charlotte was into like crust punk as well, so like kind of Crass and stuff like that. And Matt was into like Pink Floyd and Gong and stuff. And again, although that wasn't really being played in the house in kind of communal spaces where we were all exposed to it, there was an awareness of this music as, maybe something kind of mysterious that got kind of played from behind the closed doors of our elder siblings' bedrooms and what have you. So I suppose there was kind of a certain level of intrigue there.
Yeah, definitely.
And then in terms of how I got into playing music personally, I mean, I suppose around, in our early teens, another, I suppose, quite big figure from the Wigan music scene who you'll know, and I suppose some of all our other friends from Wigan who are likely to end up watching this, and maybe some from further afield will know, is Steve Jones.
Oh yeah,
Mobile Jones, who we went to primary school with. We were at Woodfield on Wigan Lane together, and I think Stephen and his family, moved to Wigan in class 2 or 3. So we were 4 or 5.
Steve Jones was in a band called Moco, who were fairly successful. I would say
successful. They had an Enemy single of the week once, and they toured with all like your Hog Boys and your Electric Sixes and all that. They were, I suppose the guys from Elbow and Gold Blade were, quite avid supporters of them, and so they were, Moko were a very, very good live band. Before Moko, Stephen was playing in a band called Zebu, which was with Little Russell, who's currently running the Tudor, which is, the main kind of rockers, indie rock, kind of rock pub in Wigan. I mean, I suppose patrons and staff of the John Bull might dispute that, but always had been. So Stephen was playing with Russell and Roger Heathcote, who I don't know if you'll know. He was somebody that was kind of buzzing around the scene at that time, but I mean, Russell's been Roger's been down in. I mean, he lived in Leeds for a number of years, and then he's been in London for a long time now. But Roger was on bass. Little Russell was on guitar, and do you know Stu Kelly? I think he plays in a band called the Midwich Cuckoos now.
Yeah,
so Stu was playing drums for Zebu, and so again they were kind of for Zebu, and they were kind of like a. I mean, Steve was playing in bands before that. But that was the first one that was kind of a regular gigging band. But before any of that happened, because we had all been friends since primary school, there was Steve and myself and my brother, two other mates who I don't think you'll know because they both moved away from Wigan, I think, before you came of age, young man.
Yeah.
But Tim Hallett and Michael Marigakis, and we all kind of got into music together. Stephen has an older brother, Peter, maybe kind of like 4 or 5 years older than us, and more so than my own brother and sister. I suppose Peter was, very kind of close and very influential on Stephen's formative music taste, and the rest of us kind of picked a lot of that up from it. And a lot of it, looking back now, was not necessarily, particularly cool or like kind of U2. But I mean, there was some good stuff like Frank Zappa and REM, and I mean,
I guess growing up in Wigan, not too far from Manchester, so at that time, I guess Britpop was sort of at its height.
So that happened. I mean, I guess when we were all starting to get into music, so kind of Peter was there in the kind of background via Stephen on like our circle of friends. He was kind of just waved in front of the camera again. Okay. But he was, he had us, getting into like the Doors and Jimi Hendrix and all that. And then, of course, grunge happened and like Nirvana and what have you. And although John and I were quite kind of resistant to Nirvana initially, but I mean, it's Michael and Steve, and they were all, this is great. And the Beastie Boys' Ill Communications, which is a kind of rockier album, right? And then kind of all Rage Against the Machine and that. And again, some kind of less cool stuff, Terrorvision, it's kind of embarrassing to talk about that now, but that was, maybe a band that I was quite into early on. And all like Green Day and stuff. And I think early Green Day does I mean, it's sonic, I mean, it's the good songs and it's sonically quite nice as well. And then Britpop happened, and I suppose the Britpop band that had the biggest lasting influence on me, and I often get pilloried for saying this, but I stand by it, it's Oasis. And I mean, the songwriting, I mean, not that I'm involved in songwriting or like conventional song structures in any way, shape or form, but more than that, it was like the kind of the sonic characteristic, the scale of Oasis's sound and like how harmonically dense it is, especially the first the first album and some tunes on the second one, just this massive wall of sound, humbuckers, P90s just smashed through Marshalls, just playing kind of open chords and bar chords, or such a big sound, so kind of harmonically dense. And I think that kind of primed my sensibilities for some of the more out there stuff that I got into later, like all the kind of drone stuff, like like Tony Conrad or Phil Niblock or whatever. Because if you kind of froze like just a moment of like a big kind of Oasis chord and then drag that out for like 20 minutes, that's basically my my musical ideal now.
Yeah. So how did you sort of transition from listening to that Oasis and some of these Britpop bands to the more kind of, I guess you could say, alternative or experimental avant-garde genres? Who is it who kind of got you into that?
Well, I mean, so again, kind of from around that time, kind of getting into like, reading the NME every week and reading, buying the NME and Melody Maker every week and other music magazines and also kind of guitar magazines, started to become aware of Sonic Youth and Mogwai and stuff like that. And I suppose kind of Mogwai were putting stuff out just before, while I was at sixth form. I mean, the Verve were also a very big kind of formative influence. And that's another one that's not necessarily that cool to kind of talk about. But if you listen to the first couple of Verve records and Nick McCabe's guitar playing, it's very kind of freewheeling, very psychedelic. I mean, it sounds a bit like Lift to Experience or something like that.
Okay, yeah.
Like, very, very kind of epic. I mean, it's shoegazy. Didn't get into kind of a lot of shoegaze stuff. It's like fucking alarm going off. I don't know if the mic's picking that up.
It's okay. I can pause it and then we can.
No, it's all right.
It's okay. It's good. It's gone off.
It's 12 o'clock. When you get to my age, that's bedtime. So it's so the Verve's comeback, which was again kind of while we were at university, kind of Urban Hymns and OK Computer, so Radiohead. So all of that kind of came out while we were at university, and kind of also kind of getting into like Jeff Buckley, and through that Tim Buckley. And once you get into Tim Buckley and you dig a little bit deeper and you go to like his records like Star Sailor and Lorca or whatever, which is getting kind of quite, you're going quite deep there. And again, from the kind of music magazines that we were reading at the time, I know it's probably a little bit strange that I tend to be framing everything in terms of we rather than I, but that's kind of a twin thing, perhaps. But
okay.
I suppose like the journey was kind of very. But I mean, you've got three brothers, so I mean, I suppose like your own kind of musical journey is a shared one, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because we grew up together, and like their influences, passed on to me. So. Yeah. Like for me, growing up, I was listening to Ben, just like my eldest brother. He was obsessed with Radiohead, so I was just listening to radio for a long time. I didn't really appreciate it at the time, but now I'm a bit older, I can be like, really. I mean, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, I guess Ben must have been a big Jeff Buckley fan as well.
Yeah, as well. Same.
The way he sings, yeah. And again, kind of Jeff Buckley is one of those where, if you talk about Jeff Buckley now, I mean people do. I mean, it's kind of whack, isn't it? It's kind of like very really kind of overwrought, kind of torridly kind of emotional music. But I mean, it was kind of sonically quite interesting. But and he is he's an interesting guitar player as well. And I suppose kind of listening to Jeff Buckley and then an interview with Bernard Butler, who's the guitarist from Suede, who he was a big Jeff Buckley fan. And again, around that time, I heard an interview with Bernard Butler, and he was talking about his love of Jeff Buckley. This was after Jeff Buckley died, I think. But he started talking about how Jeff Buckley used to use open tunings on the guitar. And that was, I suppose, one of the first times that I became aware that you could, tune the guitar into anything other than standard tuning. And so from then getting into kind of Jeff Buckley, and also I think Nick Drake came up in that same Bernard Butler interview. And again, we're getting in like Nick Drake and the kind of tunings that that he used, and then around the same time, kind of getting into, I suppose before Sonic Youth, like reading interviews with people like Uruse Yatsura, who were like a Glaswegian band, but very heavily influenced by Sonic Youth. And the guitarist Fergal Keane, I think his name was, is that right? Well, Fergal anyway, was talking about Fergus. I don't fucking know, but he was talking about like, tuning all your strings to E. Like I like tuning all the strings to E for that egg slicer sound. It was like a comment that stuck with me, and started trying stuff like that out. And again, kind of around the same time as we were getting into all that stuff in terms of gigs that were going on in Wigan, Stephen's band Zebu that I spoke about before were playing, and Brendan O'Leary, who's another kind of big presence on the Wigan music scene. First met Brendan when John and I signed up to play for the Tudors Sunday League team.
Interesting.
And he was playing, and he was playing for them as well. And but of course it's like the Sunday League team for like a rockers pub, so everybody was kind of well into their music. So that was what a lot of the conversations were about. And that was when we met Brendan. He's like maybe 5 years older than me. I think we were like 16 when we joined the Tudor pub team. Too young to drink. I mean, I remember when we were signing out, when we were doing like our FA registrations, we had to say to the manager, like, you're not going to tell Russell, the manager of the Tudor, that we're not 18 yet. I was like, well, I bet he already knows for a start. But yeah, obviously we're not going to share any of this information. But anyway, we're at Brendan played in a band called Fleck. At the time, just kind of, I mean, looking back now, although I didn't have the kind of frame of reference to contextualize this at the time, but Brendan's like a big kind of guided by voices and I suppose kind of K records, kind of beat happening kind of stuff, but like kind of bits of that. And I suppose kind of Flex sound and kind of Brendan's voice. You're also looking at kind of like British stuff like I don't know, for like comparisons, like I don't know, like Hefner or somebody like that. I mean, I suppose Hefner sounded a lot like Violent Femmes or something like that. But so Fleck were happening. Stephen's band Zebu that like metamorphosed into Moko when Stephen, there was that's fucking terrible. I can't remember what, like the band that all the lads from Moko, like Rigby, Nick, and Simon, were playing in a band with John Hodson, who plays in Sprinters.
Yeah.
And I feel bad, I can't remember what the name of that band was. But anyway, Stephen kind of wound up kind of poaching all of those guys. I think John Hodson might have been an early incarnation of Moko. I can't remember, but anyway, quite quickly it coalesced into the kind of 4 key members. Also, kind of Rigby. I suppose some people that might end up watching this for like a kind of another kind of peripheral reference, but Rigby nowadays, I suppose, like one of the musical projects on and off that he's the guitarist from Moko that he's most kind of involved in is, I suppose, the Davros and the Deep Space Deviants.
Okay.
Which kind of developed out of Stephen's post-Moko band, the Shook-Ups. Before taking on the name of the Shook-Ups, they had the fucking terrible name, the Lentilists. But that was Stephen. It's kind of a rotating cast, but Stephen, Rigby on guitar, Sean Doherty, who played in Filthy Romance, and Joe Rigby, not Joe Rigby, Joe
From the VCs.
fucking, from the VCs. Yeah, that's Joe Rigby. Yeah, his surname's Rigby, isn't it?
No, I
Is
don't
that
think it's
right?
Rigby. I can't remember his
No,
name.
what's his fucking?
In
just
fact, he lives just
yeah.
up the road.
Everybody, everybody in Wigan lives in Swindon. What's
It's-
Joe's surname? Just Joe Oxley. Joe Oxley.
Joe Oxley,
Joe's
yeah.
from St Helens. But I mean, I suppose like the Shook-Ups, the Lentalists, the Shook-Ups. I mean, that was kind of a super group. So you had Stephen and Joe Oxley, who's now doing big things as TVAM, and Sean Doherty's also kind of. I think he's been playing in TVM's touring band as well. But I mean, he signed to. Did he sign to Mute or something like that? But yeah, he was in the VCs and then got into TVM. Who else was in that band? Dave Arnold, who was in Jail Cell Recipes. Again, kind of a Wigan punk legend. Although I didn't really kind of find that out until a lot later. But involved with. Kind of all the like legendary punk gigs at the cricketers down on.
So yeah, I wanted to ask you about this. I was told, I don't know if is this a myth or not, that Green Day played in Wigan and also Fugazi.
I think Fugazi did. I know for a fact that Green Day did. Although that was kind of before my time.
Oh, okay.
There's videos of it. There are videos of it on the old YouTubes.
There is, yeah.
So yeah, there was kind of and then, I mean, like other kind of bands from that kind of scene. So yeah, Dave Arnold's a kind of Wigan punk legend. But what I was going to get at was Rigby and Dave were both in this Davros and the Deep Space Deviants, which is fronted by Paul, who runs Wigan's finest record shop, Static Records. But of course, Paul, as Davros, was on Britain's Got Talent, right?
That's
and
it. Yeah, he was.
Made it through to the final, and actually, I think like Dave Arnold is kind of visible in one of the kind of sequences that they made and aired for that. But anyway, yeah. So we're getting ahead of ourselves. But so Zebu, one of the other big bands. That were playing a lot in Wigan at the time that went on to do, very big and very good things was Narcosis.
Narcosis, yeah. So they're like a grindcore band, like genre, the style they did.
Yeah, grindcore band. I mean, they had, they did a lot of like tours with fucking Brutal Truth and Melt Banana, did
Melt Banana,
splits with stuff with Swarm and stuff like that. But their final, after they split up, they had like a best of compilation that came out on Earache. Best served cold. Chris actually worked in-house as a designer with Earache for a while as well, which again people know it's, I suppose, Earache's known for all like your kind of Napalm Deaths and Godflesh and stuff like that. But so yeah, so it was like quite different kind of music, but like Narcosis, because there weren't that many good bands in Wigan. It was very common to have like Fleck and Zebu and Narcosis all on the same bill playing the Tudor or whatever. So that was kind of our and we occasionally, like around that time, kind of like dabbling in kind of like musical projects with Brendan and Steve, like me and my brother kind of. So that was when we started to get into improvising, I guess. And kind of just like, oh, we've got a gig. Like, we don't have any fucking songs.
Yeah.
What are we going to do? It's like, we're just going to turn up and play. And that's kind of something that, I've never really, gotten past or grown out. I mean, I see one of your kind of questions was, when did you start writing your own music? I've never written any music. I've just been like a hardcore, avowed improviser since my late teens.
You're like an old school jazzer. You just turn up.
I guess, without the chops.
Without the chops,
without the chops or any kind of level of discipline. But I mean, that was it, and kind of, and I suppose it was once I got to university and started reading Wire magazine. Got a mate, Lav, who I met in my first kind of month or so at University of Lavagna Ratnapal, he's now a history professor in Korea.
Wow.
But Lav was into all like Heino Keiji and the Boredoms and Coil and stuff like that, and he was a regular reader of Wire magazine, and that was when I kind of graduated from just reading fucking NME and taking that as my kind of benchmark for what was good, and started reading Wire and getting into kind of deeper and weirder stuff. But I mean, at the same time as all this was going on, like in our first year at university, so this would have been 1998. First or second year at university, but it was like when the Flaming Lips made their kind of comeback with the Soft Bulletin and like kind of Mercury Rev, and obviously kind of Mogwai, Godspeed You Black Emperor, all of that kind of. Fugazi did a couple of tours while I was in my first year at university, so I went to see them a couple of times.
Wow. I just want to say I hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. Can I ask that you like and subscribe to my channel to help me expand? Thanks, and enjoy the rest of the podcast. How were they live? Were they? I bet they were fucking awesome, man.
Yeah, intense. Have you never seen them?
No.
Oh, far out.
I mean, I think they're still playing, aren't they? Like, they're still releasing stuff. I'm not sure. Oh,
are they? I saw Brent. I saw. Oh fuck! What's the bass player name? Is it Brendan Canty? Is it? Was that the drummer?
Oh, I can't. I know that Ian's got a band called the Evans, is it? Or the Evens?
Right.
It's like a duo with his wife, I think.
I saw the bass player was giving like online bass lessons or something like that, so you can kind of tap him up. But yeah, kind of Fugazi and all that, and like we got into kind of like jamming like heavily at university, just kind of like with my housemates, and kind of like just getting into like 30-minute like drawn out kind of jam sessions. And then when we came back in the holidays, me and my brother and Brendan and Stephen would kind of get together and again do this kind of like deep kind of long jammed out kind of semi like song, like improvised kind of song form kind of structures, but kind of quite different to the actual kind of more focused music that Brendan and Stephen were doing at the time. And that kind of carried on all throughout kind of university and kind of getting deeper into like a lot of Japanese stuff. And then when I was in my second or third year at university, All Tomorrow's Parties. So All Tomorrow's Parties, I think, was in the summer of my first year at university. Actually, the summer of my first year at university was when Mogwai headlined the second stage at Glastonbury.
Right.
And that was fucking... Because even though I was a big Mogwai fan already, just like kind of going to watch that was just fucking absolutely just mind-blowing. And then the next year was the Mogwai curated All Tomorrow's Parties, and so saw all like Shellac and Papa.
So what's All Tomorrow's Parties then for people who don't know?
People don't know. Kind of. Well, it started off. I mean, do you know what the kind of precursor to All Tomorrow's Parties was, Rick? I'm going to put you on the spot here.
I don't, but I do. I heard the story about how it all kind of ended, and
how it ended. Yeah,
it's
sorry.
Pretty shocking, but yeah.
I mean, yeah. So there's. I mean, I suppose I know some of the people involved, so I can't necessarily talk too much about that. But Bell and Sebastian won the Brit Award for I think it was in 1998 or 99. Like the Brit Award for Best Newcomer or something like that was opened up to a public vote. And Bell and Sebastian, I suppose, in similar fashion to getting Rage Against the Machine to Christmas #1 or whatever, but they managed to kind of stage, a bid amongst their fans to kind of get Bell and Sebastian this Brit Award, which they did successfully. And after that kind of bizarrely, thrust this kind of real kind of underground, real indie schmindy kind of nobody's ever heard of them band suddenly into nobody outside of that kind of scene had really heard of them, suddenly kind of thrust them into the spotlight. And as like a vehicle to capitalize on that fame, they organized a festival at Camber Sands, whatever, it was at Butlins or Pontins or whatever, but a holiday camp down on the south coast. And that was kind of curated and kind of headlined, etc., by Bell and Sebastian, but it had all like, I think the Flaming Lips played and stuff like that. And then the next year, as a follow-up to that, was the inaugural kind of All Tomorrow's Parties, which is this festival. I suppose kind of most people that are likely to be listening to this will have heard of it, but it was like a series of festivals that were generally kind of curated by the great and the good from, whether it was like Mogwai or, Sonic Youth. I think there was one curated by Tortoise. Was there one?
Yeah. It was probably the main alternative to the mainstream festivals like Glastonbury, Leeds and Reading. So you're more kind of, I guess, out there musicians and artists and experimental stuff.
Yeah, kind of that fringe experimental. I mean, I suppose kind of listening back now, I mean, like it's kind of like, wow, I thought that was experimental at the time. And if you kind of compare it to some of the fucking crazy shit that, wound up listening to later. But yeah, it was that kind of, that kind of like, I suppose kind of that post-rock, kind of, it was like kind of post-rock, wasn't it? And so all your kind of Mogwais and your Tortoises and your kind of Shellacks, and then there's like a lot of crossover with stuff like Aphex Twin and Square Pusher, and so it was that kind of kind of Warp Records, and All Tomorrow's Parties. I mean, I think like ATP kind of beyond like the festivals, they actually started kind of putting out music and stuff as well, didn't they? And I guess Fuck Buttons were one of the I suppose the flagship bands to come out of that.
Yeah, and they did like one-off shows and stuff as well, and I think they had a festival in America as well. As well as the UK.
Well, they had one in Japan as well. They had like an offshoot called "I'll Be Your Mirror," which was in Japan. Kind of Fuck Buttons came over to play that, and their manager Declan and Sim, another of the lads that used to work for ATP, kind of came and stayed at crashed on my fucking floor.
That's great.
For like a week or a couple of weeks before the festival. But all tomorrow's Parties. I mean, obviously, there's no need to kind of go into how it ended, but ended in quite spectacular fashion. Although, I've kind of heard rumblings that didn't they kind of reactivate one of their social media accounts a couple of months ago and started selling ATP T-shirts again? So that kind of seems to give some kind of suggestion that might be.
They were pulling in some really big artists, and I was kind of like, how are they managing to do that? Like, really big.
That's also something that kind of, I suppose, is worth saying. That I think kind of All Tomorrow's Parties, that trend of classic bands doing performances that were basically playing one of their classic albums from start to finish, kind of grew. Kind of grew out of All Tomorrow's Parties, right? Because you had like Slint playing Spiderland or whatever. I missed that. That was kind of. I know
Scott went to that ATP when Slint.
I think that was after I'd already moved to Japan. So that's a pretty good excuse not to have gone. And I missed an ATP just before I came to Japan in the summer of 2003 when I was doing my kind of teacher training course to come out to Japan. And I think that was the one that was curated by Tortoise.
When and why did you decide to move to Japan?
I suppose there's a couple of musical steps that kind of come in slightly before that. John was at university in Lancaster, right? I went to York, John went to Lancaster. And up in Lancaster, he met Dean McPhee, who's now kind of known as like a solo guitarist.
Yeah, I've seen him, yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's fucking amazing. Fucking amazing. Like, and he was signed to, whatever. Like the guy that used to run kind of Blast First or whatever, kind of was blown away by him, kind of signed him and that. But so John met Dean up in Lancaster, and at the time Dean was off playing guitar from like an RSI kind of condition in his wrist, so he had like a couple of years away from playing guitar, and he was just organising like DJ events and stuff up in Lancaster. Well, not just DJ events, but like events up in Lancaster. And he met John at some kind of party or some event, and kind of invited him to come along. And John then invited me to come and help him DJ, kind of share our record collection and DJ at this. And it was through that kind of scene up in Lancaster that we started. So it was like loads of interesting stuff. That was the first time I saw Bilge Pump, was at one of Dean's events up in Lancaster. And there was also the jazz pianist Stephen Grew, who used to play with like Evan Parker and Mick Beck and stuff. And I saw Stephen Grew playing up in. So that was through that I met Stephen, and kind of I've seen him up playing in Lancaster with. Kind of Pat Thomas and Howard Riley and all that kind of stuff. And so Dean and who else? 3D Tanks were another of the kind of bands from that scene. And one of the lads from 3D Tanks is now in the Lovely Eggs.
That's a great band name. 3D Tanks.
Yeah, I think the Tanks was spelt with an X, if I recall correctly. But so one of the lads from 3D Tanks, Dave is his name, I forget, but is now in the Lovely Eggs with one of the girls who used to be in Angelica, kind of like a Lancaster, like teen punk band. So it's kind of going up there and kind of getting involved in that kind of scene. That again, kind of horizons kind of expanded again. And then around that same time, Dylan Harris and Sean Sean Doherty, who kind of came up in the conversation earlier, had started putting on gigs in Wigan at the Lux Club.
That's no longer there.
Which is no longer there. Well, it was like the old Lux Club. And then that kind of moved, and then like the kind of subsequent Lux Club is now no longer a going concern, I believe. Is that? I'm
not sure. I've not
heard anything about it.
So they were called. They started like a music promotion company, or called Lupine Promotions.
Called Lupine Promotions, which has now blossomed into Lupine Travel, this kind of dark tourism company that does like trips to North Korea and Chernobyl. And
I'll link him if anybody fancies a trip to North Korea.
Well, I mean, Dylan's definitely somebody interested because, the kind of promotional stuff that Lupine kind of got into doing, like after I left, bringing all like the Libertines and stuff to. I mean, they got kind of Selfish Cunt and all that. But anyway, so they were putting on shows at the Lux Club and got invited to play. And so, actually, the first gig we did at the Lux Club was with Steve Jones, me and John and Steve Jones and Michael Maragakis, one of our kind of primary schoolmates who kind of came up in the conversation earlier. And then we got offered another gig, and I got some of the lads from Lancaster. So one of Dean McPhee's schoolmates, Ezra, who's a clarinetist, kind of played, like electronics and kind of samples, and kind of met through Dean's events. And he was into like a lot of the same stuff. And again, probably into like weirder, deeper, more far out stuff than even I was at the time. And Gulliver Brodbeck, who was, I guess, your predecessor as the drummer in an early version of Riding Shotgun by Starlight, although that didn't last very long because kind of
I thought I was the only drummer in that band.
Well, it was kind of sorry to break it to you.
Oh shit! I didn't know that.
But so we got invited to play a gig at the Lux Club by Dylan and Sean, and so we did one with Ezra and Gully. Larry Jones, who used to run a record shop up in Lancaster called Fairies Wear Boots, and I think he still does kind of record fairs and stuff under, if not under that name, kind of similar. But Larry's still on the scene, and so we did this, this set, and I can't remember who. I mean, sure it was like, I think Nancy might have been playing, like Nancy Cunliffe, who again, got signed to Leaf or whatever, kind of later on as like Nancy Elizabeth, but she was on the scene, kind of, again at the time doing kind of much simpler, but it was obvious that she had an amazing voice and she was very talented in that, but it was much kind of simpler music than she kind of wound up doing later. Matt Turner was another kind of Wigan guitarist. He was like he was a member of like an early lineup of Gomez, and so he was kind of playing around the scene at that time as well. Nancy, and I think your brother was playing Ben was playing like a lot of solo singer songwriter.
It's called Shiku Boxer, his solo name.
Right. I think the first time I saw him, I think he might have just been using Ben Wallen.
Oh yeah. Then he transitioned to Shiku Boxer.
Right. Okay. Right.
Then obviously from that, then the Beat Poet.
Beat Poet, and then Samuel Sharp. And so I can't remember who else was on the bill that first night. But anyway, it was Larry from Fairies Wear Boots on bass, doing like these colossal kind of Black Sabbath kind of just like chugging stoner rock bass line. Ezra on clarinet and sampler. Gully on just fucking really far out kind of like krautrock meets kind of Elvin Jones kind of like very, very free kind of drums, and me doing kind of like spiky kind of whatever, just kind of like quite kind of just like kind of abrasive guitar work. And we got kicked off the stage after about 15 minutes or something. Like the Mike who used to run the Lux was like, no, I'm not having it.
That seems to happen a lot at the old Lux. Like bands getting kicked out and kicked off the stage.
It happened to us 3 times, and we just changed our name every time and kind of came back. So that happened, and then like Dylan and Sean got back in touch, and they're like, we'd like you to come and do another set, but Mike says that you're not allowed to kind of play again. And I think, what did we use, like just for like the band name that time, just because we needed a name for the flyer, and me and John kind of just had a look. We were looking through like books at home, like kind of just lying around the house, and there's like some Reader's Digest kind of book, and there was like a chapter in this totally random book called A Futile Flight from Retribution, and I kind of misread the title, like A Future Flight from Retribution, and that was what we named it. That was what we used as the band name for that first one. And then we got invited back to play, and Dean came on board, and that was kind of Dean's return to playing guitar publicly.
Okay.
And Dean came on board, so it kind of blossomed into a 5-piece. So again, Ezra, clarinet and sampler, me on guitar, and I think I had an organ as well, which the same organ that I used for the riding shotgun gig that we played together in Manchester. Larry on bass, Gully on drums. But Dean was just like, I mean, he's an amazing guitarist, and anybody who's kind of familiar with what he's doing at the moment will know, like, he's an amazing guitarist. But at the time, he was just doing this really fucking volcanic, like, post-Hendrix kind of like Acid Mother's Temple, a bit like Kawabata Makoto from Acid Mother's Temple, just really full-on psych shredding.
Wow.
And we were, it was fucking, I mean, it's just terrible. There's no like recordings of any of this because it was like the pre-smartphone era or whatever.
So what circa what time is this? We're talking early noughties?
This would have been 2002, right? 2002, like the year before I came to Japan. And we were sharing a bill with some fucking like Oasis come kind of Doves kind of indie rock band from out of town that Dylan and Sean had put us on with, and we borrowed their drums, and I think we might have borrowed their amps, And again, like after like about 10 or 15 minutes of this fucking totally intense freak out with us like just like fucking pulverizing the amps, just like sonically, like just brutalizing them, and like Gully just thrashing the shit out of these fucking drums. The drummer from the band kind of came up on stage like, "Oh, cool, what the bloody hell are you playing at?" And again, that was a wrap on that. I should say about like anyway, that was a wrap on that one. And at these shows at the Lux Club, that was the first time that I met Joe Oxley. Joe from TVAM, the VCs, because he was DJing, and because he was from St Helens, right? So he wasn't from Wigan. He'd kind of, whatever. He'd kind of come through like a slightly different, but he slightly different route, but then kind of arrived on the scene, and so it was the first time I met Joe. And I guess that was kind of pre-VCs, or maybe because I guess the VCs only really, I'd never seen them before I left the country. But anyway, so we had that gig with Dean, and that was, we used the name The Reptile Scum for that. And again, kind of got the power pulled on us. And then just amazing. Before I came to Japan, so it would have been like late spring, early summer 2003. And this was a bit controversial, and I kind of feel bad about it at the time. But to my mind, I felt that Sean and Dylan had said that they wanted to do like a kind of a farewell event, and they would kind of give the booking of the bands and the kind of organizing over to me. That was my understanding at the time. Okay. And so I picked the Parish line, which was Steve Haggerty, Robin Fox and John Shale, the kind of like Teenage Fan Club kind of style band that they were doing at the time. Scott, so it was, I suppose, before he'd taken on the name of Riding Shotgun. The Stags, which is, again, Paul Static and Dave Arnold's, pre Davros and the Deep Space Deviants band. I mean, the Stags are still, I think, a going concern, although they seldom play nowadays. But I mean, they also they used to play with like Frank Sidebottom and stuff as well. But so it was a really weird lineup. But it was, the Stags, Scott doing his solo thing, the Parish line, and me. Oh, no, wait, the Parish line was at a previous gig. I think that was at the second gig at the Lux. So Scott, Stags, and then it was me, Steve Haggerty, Gully, who played drums in, Gulliver, who played drums in Reptile Scum and Future Flight from Retribution. It was just the four of us. And that's one of the best fucking gigs I've ever played in my life to this day. And it really kind of pains me that there's no recordings of that. But I just did like a load of drone loops on the computer. Ag was playing guitar, and he's such a beautiful kind of melodic guitar player. I mean, I always kind of tell people, I think he's one of, there's a lot of good guitarists in Wigan, but Ag's one of my favorites. And so Ag, Gully, I just set up like a load of drone loops on the computer. I was playing bass, Ag was playing guitar, Gully on drums, and John was kind of playing some synth and stuff. And it was just fucking, again, just kind of, totally improvised apart from the kind of, the loops that I'd set up. And it was just kind of one of those where you're kind of playing and just kind of like, whatever. I mean, it was fucking amazing. And like Paul Static had set up some like, he had like a Super 8 kind of projector, and he had all these kind of weird like test film clips of just kind of like nurses like stood in front of a wall kind of weirdly grimacing. So they were doing all these kind of projections. But anyway, that was fucking amazing. The reason that gig was kind of controversial was there was actually another band from out of town called the Blanche Dubois, who Sean and Dylan had booked for that gig, and I hadn't heard anything about that there being a fourth band until we showed up. And I was like, what the fuck? I thought this was meant to be my leaving. I thought you were kind of giving it over to me, and I was booking all the bands.
All right.
And
Okay.
I feel embarrassed about this now. Like, I threw like a wobbler about it, and this
Yeah.
band had like fucking driven up from London, and in the end, they were all like the band themselves and Dylan and Sean were like, okay, look, we're sorry, there's been a misunderstanding. If you feel that strongly about it, but we won't play. And I was like, fucking good, whatever. I feel really bad about it now, But anyway, they would have had a hard time going on after us anyway because we were fucking amazing. But and that was it, and that was when I kind of left for Japan. I should say, kind of one precursor to kind of moving to Japan. One of the reasons that I moved to Japan was, I suppose this is all kind of interconnected. Was in my second or third year at university, there was a tour of Japanese underground musicians under the title of Japanorama, and it was one of those CMN tours. They used to do like a lot of really interesting stuff, but it was like a nationwide tour, and I saw them at the old Contact Theatre in Manchester. And it was Otomo Yoshihide, Sugimoto Taku, Nakamura Toshimaru, Sachiko M, Ishikawa Sho, Hako, Yagimichi. And it was around the time that there was, not just in Japan, kind of globally at the time, there was a really kind of minimal improv scene developing. Like in the UK, it got termed like the new London silence, and it was kind of centered around like Mark Waystill and Rodri Davis and stuff like that. And in kind of Europe, there were also kind of people like Bernhard Gunther just doing really kind of like Morton Feldman influenced, really, really kind of minimal improv with all the silence, very kind of like discrete kind of sounds in there. But there was a bunch of Japanese bands that was it was kind of happenstance that they'd ended up, I suppose, playing the same kind of music. But it was, at the time, it was framed in like the British music press, The Wire specifically, as like a very kind of uniquely Japanese aesthetic to music, like incorporating like a lot of the kind of space that you see in traditional Japanese visual arts, like woodblock prints or whatever, and like the idea of, after I learned how to speak Japanese, like the idea of like the concept of ma, or like in Japanese, to be honest, it's more often like in visual arts, it's more often described as yohaku, but ma, it's like a space in usually a visual piece that to like Western sensibilities appears to be empty. It's like a blank portion of the canvas or a blank portion of the image, but according to the Japanese aesthetic, it's not empty, it's filled with itself, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so this kind of musical scene, in Japanese, it was described as onkyo or like muonke, which means like, onkyo just means kind of like sonics, but like muonke means like no sound type. So it was kind of, again, a similar kind of minimal kind of New London silence. But so it was like this kind of improvised music that incorporated a lot of silence, a lot of real kind of dramatic, pregnant pauses. But again, the idea was, they're not silences, that the silence is itself kind of part of the musical tapestry, and it's like how you deploy that. And so I got really enamored with that idea and read in The Wire that there was a venue in Tokyo called Offsite, which was like kind of a hub for that kind of scene. And I just kind of thought at the time, I'd really love to kind of go and check that out. And then I don't know if you know, but my cousin is a university professor out in Japan.
Oh, didn't know that.
So that was kind of the first kind of, he's a professor of linguistics. And so it was like the first kind of idea, like when I got back from university, And Peter would be back in. So yeah, Peter Robinson, like quite an eminent professor of linguistics for anybody that wants to look him up. But Peter was back in town one time for, I forget whether it was a christening or a funeral. I think there were a couple of trips back around the same time, like when his mum died, my dad's sister. It might have been a funeral, or it might have been his niece's, daughter's christening, or anyway. But I saw kind of Peter for the first time in several years. It was like, oh, David, you must have finished university now. What are you doing nowadays? It's like, well, I'm living with my mum and dad, and I'm working for the Halifax. And it's like, you're doing what? You want to come to Japan? It's like, well, that's a really nice idea, but it's not very realistic. It's like, of course it's realistic. You could be a model, you could work in an Irish pub. It's like, yeah, I mean, that's a nice idea, but I'm not sure it's very realistic. But that kind of started to, because the interest in Japanese music, and then from when I was younger, I kind of Japanese films and like manga and stuff.
Yeah.
Not in like a dweeb way, but cool stuff, whatever. Like, and then Brendan, who came up in the story earlier, who was kind of front fleck, and we'd kind of been doing music, and we used to play football with Brendan and another lad that used to play for the Tudor House football team, Tom Keenan. Both separately, they came out to Japan to teach English.
Okay.
And that kind of started to kind of make it seem like, okay, well, Japan's actually a country that you can move to.
Yeah.
As long as you've got a degree, then you can get you don't need an actual kind of teaching qualification like a PGCE or whatever. As long as you've got a degree and you can do some kind of an ESL qualification like a CELTA or a Trinity TESOL. And at the time, you didn't really even need those, to be honest. I mean, now you probably need some kind of qualifications, but at the time you didn't really. But again, kind of Tom came back from Japan one time and ran into him in the Tudor and had basically the same conversation that I had with my cousin. Right? Like, oh, not seeing you for ages. What are you doing these days? You must have finished university and that. Like, working for the Halifax and living with my mum and dad. And he was like, you're doing what? You want to come out to Japan, mate? And so Brendan and Tom both kind of teaching English. That made it seem like something that you could do. And then around the same time that I met the guys from Lancaster and started playing with them, and kind of we did these gigs in Wigan and whatever, Ezra, who was playing clarinet and samples and that, he also kind of was looking into moving to Japan, and he lined up a job with this company, Shane English School, and I ended up applying and getting a job with the same company, and we both came to Japan around the same time.
So it's like a mass migration of Wiganers going to Japan. I mean,
Ezra from Lancaster, from Burton and Lonsdale. Yeah, but Brendan had kind of been out before, and then a few years after I moved to Japan, Chris Cattrall, who was in Narcosis, after Narcosis broke up. He and his brother both moved to Japan at the same time. His brother Nick, and me and Chris formed a band in Japan called Shigai, who, I don't know, you might have, I mean, we did play like a couple of gigs in the UK on kind of trips back and that, but that was kind of like a power electronics kind of thing. But yeah, so anyway, kind of me and Ezra kind of moved to Japan around the same time, and we kind of carried on playing music together as we had been in the UK before, and going to loads of gigs and kind of going out, and stuff, and kind of through that kind of meeting other kind of creative people. And then our first source of, our first kind of inroad into, so we did like a band with a lad from the States called Ben Remsen, who now does a really nice jazz podcast. He's back in Philly now, but wait, is he in fucking Chicago now? But he's from Philly or whatever. But he does a really nice jazz podcast afterwards, which I can't remember what it's called. But he did a nice band after he went back called Little Ocean. But so Ezra and Ben and I kind of started doing like these long kind of freak out jams together, and then Ben left Japan, and then.
So this is like your first sort of year or two in Japan?
Yeah, first year in Japan, so kind of, yeah, 2000, 2003, 2004. And then, I mean, like a lot of the kind of chances that came my way actually kind of came through Ezra, to be honest. So he went on a trip to Nagoya to go and watch Acid Mother's Temple, like at some all-night gig, and over there he met this guy Cal Lyle, who was a Tokyo-based Canadian musician, and he was doing like gig organizing at this venue called Super Deluxe, which was kind of like a big influence on Cafe Otto, I think, in London. Like kind of Cafe Otto is often kind of whatever, people kind of familiar with both scenes. And I think like the kind of guys that are, the people that are behind Cafe Otto are on record as saying that Super Deluxe was one of the kind of influences. But actually the first gig I went to in Japan was actually Luke Ferrari and Otomo Yoshihide at Super Deluxe. That was before we met Cal. And then maybe another one was, Incapacitants, Guilty Connector, and Sightings, who are a fucking really good noise rock band from the States. We saw them at Niman down to 20,000 volts, which is like a hardcore venue in Koenji in Tokyo. But anyway, so our first source of gigs in Japan, and this was after we'd met Cal, but Ezra met this guy in a bar called Zulu, like Kinya Tsuruyama, who was a Buto dancer, like kind of a form like Japanese avant-garde dance.
Okay.
Right. And got talking to him, and he said he had like a bunch of performances coming up, and Ezra kind of mentioned that he was kind of playing music, and that I think he gave him like a CDR or a mini disc or a cassette or something of like some of the jams that we'd done together. And he said, I want you to kind of come and play. And that was like a real kind of baptism of fire, kind of getting invited to come and do the kind of improvised music for these kind of Buto dance events. And I'd already, come from a scene where it was kind of improvising, but it was like improvising from like predominantly like a more rock kind of angle. But then suddenly you're in kind of like high art, kind of, everybody's from like jazz backgrounds or kind of contemporary classical or whatever. And it's, serious music. It's your Derek Bailey kind of style stuff. And in fact, one of the lads that was also kind of involved in these early shows that we got invited to do, Brett Lana, who's a koto player. He's kind of given up kind of playing koto now, but like Brett, he studied at Mills College under Anthony Braxton and like Joel Leandra. And he had been booking gigs in Tokyo. He brought, he was involved in bringing John Fay over to kind of play in Tokyo, and Ellen Fullman and stuff like that. But so suddenly we're in this setting where we're kind of playing with kind of heavyweights. It's like Brett. It's like one day when I was talking to him, it's like, oh yeah, I've got a new solo album out. It's like there's got some guests on it. It's like, oh yeah, who's on it? Oh, Fred Frith and Jim O'Rourke, and like the guitarist from Deerhoof and stuff. It's like fucking hell. Anthony Braxton, like again, kind of non-jazz fans will the kind of a connection for them. Chonde Braxton from Battles was the son of the jazz saxophonist Anthony Braxton, who's a professor at Mills College.
So many connections. Well,
it's all fucking connected. I mean, it's all that's the kind of sweet thing about this scene, isn't it? It's like kind of how interconnected it is and how easy it is to kind of, whatever. And he'd studied under the Koto master Sawai Kazue, who also taught Yagi Michio, who's like one of the musicians that had seen on that kind of Japanorama tour. That was kind of one of the things that kind of made me want to come to Japan. And so that's it. Kind of one of our first gigs in Japan and kind of playing with somebody that's played with like fucking Fred Frith and Anthony Braxton and John Fay. So like all of these kind of like musical fucking heroes. Yeah. And so we got into doing that, and then we did one of those kind of Buto dance shows at Super Deluxe, and shortly after that, me and Ezra started playing with this guy Cal Lyle, who I mentioned earlier, who'd met up in Nagoya, and we formed a band called Jahilia. It was like a three-piece kind of improvised noise rock band. And Cal also kind of played in like a couple of other bands, Tetragrammaton and Fallopian Disco Force. He's like a big, kind of like lots of improvising duos with Tabata Mitsuru from Acid Mother's Temple, and who's one of the founder members of Boredoms, and was in Zenigeva and stuff. And so, we formed Jahilia and started playing out regularly. And later on, James Hadfield, who now writes for Wire, also kind of joined Jahilia on saxophone, second sax. So that was kind of my main band for a lot of years, and kind of ended up, doing like a lot of shows with like the people that, had been kind of some of the reasons that I wanted to move to Japan in the first place. People like Nakamura Toshimaru and Akiyama Tetsuji, and Tabata Mitsuru from Boredoms. And
so in terms of the scene at the time, were you playing all over Japan or just primarily in Tokyo? Or
it was mostly in Tokyo. Like kind of Tokyo and Yokohama. We did one Kansai tour that was booked for us by Hide Fujiwara Ultra B-Day, who again he lived in the States for a long time. Was kind of, I mean, some people who will know the name Ultra B-Day, and he was kind of involved with like dead Kennedys and stuff. But then he came back to Japan, and he was doing besides Ultra B-Day, he was doing a band called Amazon Saliva with Tabata and with the lad whose name escapes me right now, but who is playing drums in Acid Brothers Temple at the moment. And so Hide booked a tour for us, and so we went over and we played Kyoto, Osaka, and Kobe. But that's the only, that's really the only time that we've been out and kind of played outside of the Kanto area. So kind of, Tokyo, Yokohama. I mean, the Kanto area. We've done like kind of festivals up in Yamanashi and stuff, but that's just kind of to the west of.
I mean, Tokyo is a huge place in itself, so you've got a lot of exploration to do, and
and a very big wide scene and a very eclectic scene. And so kind of Jahilia was the main band for a long time, and then after Chris from Narcosis moved to Japan, Chris and I started doing this band Shigai. So it was just kind of two-piece kind of like a noise rock version of Erasure, I suppose. So not noise rock, kind of power electronics. So it was me on kind of electronics and kind of textures, and Chris on although he played guitar in Narcosis, but he was just doing vocals. And then the lineup of Shigai expanded later on with this guy Kenny Sanderson, who again, real kind of like noise luminary, and also kind of a real like pioneer in terms of like British or foreign noise people basing themselves in Japan, because he'd been here since the early 90s, performing under the name Facial Mess, doing like real kind of cut up harsh noise, and kind of collaborating with like Suppression and stuff like that. But so Kenny joined Narcosis later on. Not Narcosis, joined Shigai later on. Shigai, the name of Shigai is just, again, when we were trying to come up with a name, it's Carcass, the grindcore band. It's Carcass in Japanese.
Oh, okay.
So,
Shigai.
But Shigai, so we're doing Shigai. and then Chris moved back to Japan, and it was around that same time where I started playing out solo a lot more under the name Hitodama, which is kind of my solo kind of.
And what does that
Whatever.
mean? Is that?
That's like a will-o'-the-wisp.
Say again, sorry.
It's basically a will-o'-the-wisp.
Will-o'-the-wisp.
You know, like a. Have you not heard like that kind of? It's like a kind of paranormal term, a will-o'-the-wisp. These kind of like a foxfire, like a floating orb that you might see like in the forest or whatever. It's basically like a transmigrating soul, or some kind of a spook or a ghost or something.
Heard it,
but
actually, yeah, I think I've heard it. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, like, what was it like? Because personally, we've talked a little bit about myself. Like, maybe I could go and live in Japan. I mean, learning the language and kind of transitioning to a different country and a culture completely the opposite to Wigan, really. How did you find it when you first moved there and learning the language and fitting in with the culture? And
well, it's one of those, like, I mean, kind of people quite, like a lot of Japanese people were quite keen to ask me early on, like, what do you think of Japan? Is it strange? Is it really different? And I was expecting, because, I mean, everybody's like, and yourself, because you've been to Japan, kind of everybody's image is of like this kind of, because I suppose at the time it was when, like, you think about like fucking Blade Runner and Akira, and at the time like Adam and Joe, Joe Cornish or whatever, kind of, comedians, kind of media people, they had a show called like Adam and Joe Go Tokyo, and like most kind of, Western coverage of Japan kind of just focused on like a lot of the zanier aspects. It's just like, oh yeah, Japan's going to be, or like that episode of The Simpsons where they go to Japan or whatever, the Mr. Sparkle episode. Everybody thinks it's going to be like a real kind of full-on psychedelic experience. But I mean, the thing that kind of surprised me most early on was just like, all right, I mean, okay, it's a place where people live and people do basically the same things wherever they are. I mean, obviously, kind of visually, the cities look quite different, and obviously, it takes some getting used to. Because I didn't speak any Japanese when I first came out, and so that was an interesting one, because I always used to wonder, like when I was younger, like you'd hear about people who can't read, like kind of, in the UK, kind of people who are native speakers of English, but they've never learned to properly read, who are kind of illiterate. It's like, how can that be? How can you live your whole life speaking English and be in an environment where everybody's using English and not just naturally learn to read? And also, like, what a trip it must be to just be kind of going around and able to understand what people are saying, but not able to kind of read anything or interpret anything you see. And obviously kind of learn, coming to Japan, I mean, obviously initially I didn't understand spoken Japanese either, but just kind of all the signs and all the labels on everything is just kind of like completely incomprehensible. And it's stuff like, if you think about it, Mogwai's first proper album, Young Team, was like that photo on the front cover. It looks like a really atmospheric kind of photo from Japan or whatever, and it's like, oh yeah, wow, this looks really kind of sleek and modern. I wonder what the Japanese on this front cover says. It's just it's the fucking it's the sign out the front of a bank. It's the name of a bank. It's the name of a bank. Like, and so it's like if Mono, I don't know, if like Mono or Envy or somebody did a record and the front cover was like a picture of a fucking branch of Barclays Bank or something, like Halifax.
It's a bit like when you see an Italian restaurant and it has like it's got an Italian name, and in translation it might just be the food, but in Italian it's got the kind of pretty italics. It looks, really authentic, the same sort of thing.
It's that kind of thing, and of course in Japan, kind of English is often used in kind of a similar way, just as kind of a decorative, something decorative. But yeah, I mean, it was not that you can really tell from the kind of conversation that we've just had, but for somebody that prides themselves on being, relatively fluent when it comes to communication and a fairly comfortable user of the English language, and of course that's the profession that I've wound up in, writing and translating and what have you. But to have that taken away from you and kind of be put in a situation where you have only, you have like a communicative capacity that is closer to an infant than an adult, and somebody in their early 20s. That was kind of, it's interesting the way that kind of forces you to kind of strip down your ego and kind of build yourself up again from the ground up.
It must be really frustrating. You want to sort of express yourself in the same way, but
all right,
okay.
Wicked.
Thanks, Dave.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Rick. I'm going to go to bed, and I'll see you later. Thanks very much.
See you later. Thanks.